That morning, his entire future rested inside a thin brown file pressed tightly against his chest. One job interview, one final chance to escape poverty humiliation, and a marriage already cracking under the weight of failure. He ran through traffic, sweat on his face, fear in his heart, praying he wouldn't be late. Then on a quiet roadside, a stranger's voice stopped him. A woman, alone, her car broken, her eyes filled with fear. He looked at his watch. He looked at her. If he stopped, he would lose everything. If he walked away, she could lose much more. He chose kindness. Minutes later, the interview doors closed forever. What he didn't know was this: that single decision would destroy his life, before rebuilding it in ways he never imagined. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories of kindness, justice, and destiny move you, don't forget to subscribe. Before hardship carved lines into his face and silence filled his home, Adekunle Mensah had once lived a life many young men in the city dreamed of. He was brilliant from the start. At university, Adekunle stood out not because he was loud or flashy, but because he was sharp, disciplined, and deeply focused. While others chased parties and shortcuts, he stayed late in the laboratory, solving problems no one else wanted to touch. Lecturers trusted him. Classmates admired him. When he graduated with honors in petrochemical engineering, his future already looked secure. That future arrived faster than he imagined. Within months, Adekunle was employed by a large industrial company on the outskirts of the city. The pay was good. The benefits were solid. For the first time in his life, money was no longer something he worried about daily. He moved into a clean, modern apartment in a respectable neighborhood. He bought a modest car, nothing flashy but reliable. To his family back home, he had made it. It was during this season of stability that he met Zainab. Zainab was beautiful, confident, and admired by many. She loved fine clothes, soft music, and the kind of lifestyle she saw on social media. Adekunle adored her. He believed love meant providing, protecting, and pleasing. He took her out, often surprised her with gifts, and spoke about their future with certainty. When he proposed, she said yes without hesitation. For a while, life felt complete. They married quietly but happily. Adekunle worked hard. Zainab enjoyed the comfort his salary provided. Friends visited their home and admired what they had built so quickly. Adekunle believed he was blessed. Then, without warning, everything cracked. The company began to struggle. Contracts were lost. Payments delayed. Rumors spread in the hallways. One morning, employees were called into a meeting that changed their lives. The company was shutting down. Bankruptcy. Operations suspended indefinitely. Adekunle sat frozen in his chair as the words sank in. Just like that, his job was gone. At first, he was calm. He told himself it was temporary. He had skills, experience, confidence. Surely another company would see his value. He polished his CV, reached out to contacts, and began submitting applications. Days passed, then weeks. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls never came. Some companies replied politely, saying they would get back to him. Others said nothing at all. Adekunle spent his mornings walking from office to office, his afternoons refreshing his email, his evenings reassuring Zainab that things would soon improve. But Zainab was not reassured. At first, she tried to be patient. She told herself this was just a phase. But as the weeks dragged on and the money stopped coming and her patience thinned, the lifestyle she enjoyed began to slip away. Fewer dinners out, no weekend trips, no new clothes. The silence between them grew heavier. "You said this wouldn't last long," she said one evening, standing by the mirror, adjusting a dress she no longer wore outside. "I'm trying," Adekunle replied gently. "These things take time." "How much time?" she snapped. "Because bills don't wait." Her words stung, but he swallowed the pain. He believed understanding would save them. It didn't. Savings drained faster than he expected. Rent loomed. Utility bills stacked up. Adekunle sold his car to stay afloat, then the television, then the furniture piece by piece. Each sale felt like surrender. Eventually, they could no longer afford their apartment. They moved to a smaller, distant part of the city, where rent was cheaper and opportunities fewer. The walls were thin, the neighborhood unfamiliar. Zainab hated it instantly. "This is where you've brought me," she said, looking around with disgust. "It's temporary," Adekunle promised again, "just until I get back on my feet." But his words no longer carried weight. Zainab's tone changed completely. The warmth disappeared. Conversations turned into accusations. Every failure became his fault. Every hardship a reminder of his uselessness. She mocked his job search. She compared him to other men. She questioned his worth as a husband. "You were a man when you had money," she said one night. "Now look at you." Adekunle said nothing. He simply stared at the floor, shame burning in his chest. Still, he did not give up. Every morning he woke early, ironed his shirt carefully, and stepped out with hope stitched tightly into his heart. He walked long distances to save transport fare. He submitted applications until his fingers ached. He prayed silently in buses and corridors, asking God for just one chance. Then one morning, as tension filled their small room yet again, Zainab stood at the doorway, arms folded, eyes sharp. "You better find a job today," she said coldly. "Because I cannot continue like this." Adekunle opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, his phone rang. The sound cut through the room like lightning. Zainab frowned. "Who is calling you this early?" With trembling hands, Adekunle answered. "Good morning," a voice said professionally. "Is this Mr. Adekunle Mensah?" "Yes," he replied, barely breathing. "This is Metro Petrochem Industries. You applied for an engineering position. We would like you to come in for an interview today at 8 a.m. For a moment, Adekunle couldn't speak. Metro Petrochem was not just any company. It was one of the biggest in the sector. Competitive, respected, powerful. "Yes," he finally said, voice shaking. "Yes, I will be there." The call ended. Adekunle stared at his phone as if it might disappear. Hope rushed back into his veins. "This is it," he said, turning to Zainab. "This is my chance." She looked at him, unreadable. "Then you better not mess it up," she replied flatly. He nodded, heart racing. He didn't know it yet, but that interview would become the most important morning of his life, not because of what he gained, but because of what he was about to lose. And the kindness that would change everything. The sky was still pale when Adekunle rose from the thin mattress that served as their bed. Dawn crept through the small window, carrying the quiet promise of a new day, one that could either save him or finally break what was left of his spirit. He stood for a moment, breathing slowly, steadying his hands. Today mattered. He washed quickly with cold water, the chill sharpening his senses. From the corner of the room, he took out his best shirt, the one he had kept carefully folded, reserved for moments that could change his life. He ironed it with care, smoothing every crease as if precision alone could convince fate to be kind. When he was done, he dressed neatly, combed his hair, and slipped his worn shoes onto his feet. On the small table, his brown file waited. Inside it lay his CV certificates and proof of a life that once made sense. He picked it up and held it close. Behind him, Zainab sat up on the bed. So she asked without warmth. "You're really going?" "Yes," Adekunle replied. "I'll be back with good news." She said nothing more. No encouragement, no prayer, just silence. Adekunle stepped outside and closed the door softly behind him. The street was already waking up. Vendors arranged their goods. Motorcycles buzzed past. Buses honked impatiently. Adekunle walked quickly to the nearest bus stop, paid his fare, and squeezed into the first bus heading toward the industrial district. As the bus pulled away, his heart thumped loudly in his chest. This was it. He pictured himself sitting across from the interview panel, answering questions, confidently explaining his experience, proving his worth. He imagined calling Zainab afterward, hearing relief in her voice for the first time in months. But just a few minutes into the journey, the bus slowed, then it stopped. And at first, no one panicked. Traffic was normal in the city. But seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into long, unbearable stillness. Cars packed tightly in every direction, engines humming, drivers leaning out to shout at one another. Adekunle glanced at his wristwatch. 7:12 a.m. He swallowed. The bus inched forward, then stopped again. A man cursed loudly. A woman complained. The driver slammed his hand against the steering wheel. Adekunle checked his watch again. 7:19 a.m. His chest tightened. "Please move," he whispered under his breath, though no one could hear him. "Please." The bus crawled forward in painful increments. Adekunle's leg bounced uncontrollably. He imagined the interview room, the clock on the wall ticking forward without mercy. 7:28 a.m. Panic crept in. He pressed his forehead against the window and whispered a prayer. "God, please. Just today. Just help me today." The bus came to a complete stop again. Adekunle made a decision. As soon as the bus reached the next stop, he pushed his way toward the door and jumped down before it fully halted. He landed hard on the pavement and immediately began walking fast, then faster. He knew the distance was long, but he also knew a shortcut through a quiet side road that could save him time. He broke into a jog, gripping his file tightly as he moved. Each step echoed with urgency. His mind raced. He remembered Zainab's voice, her cold eyes, the disappointment she no longer tried to hide. He remembered selling the car, packing boxes, moving into that cramped space that never felt like home. This interview wasn't just about a job. It was about dignity. It was about survival. Adekunle turned onto the side road, breathing heavily now. The street was quieter, lined with old walls and scattered trees. Few people used it at that hour. He glanced at his watch again. 7:41 a.m. "I can still make it," he muttered, increasing his pace. That was when he heard it. "Excuse me. Please." The voice was soft, strained, and filled with fear. Adekunle slowed. For a split second, he pretended he hadn't heard it. He took 2 more steps forward. "Please," the voice came again. "Sir, please help me." He stopped. His heart pounded violently as he turned around. A woman stood beside a dark-colored car parked awkwardly by the roadside. She was well-dressed, but her face was tight with worry. One hand rested on the car door, the other pressed against her phone. Adekunle's eyes darted to his watch. 7:43 a.m. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, already stepping backward. "I have somewhere very important to be." The woman nodded, desperation flashing across her face. "I understand. But my car stopped suddenly and there's no one here. I don't know what to do. I'm scared to stay alone." Adekunle hesitated. He could hear his own thoughts screaming. "If you stop, you'll be late. If you're late, they'll reject you. If they reject you, you'll go home empty again." He looked at the road ahead. Empty, silent. Then he looked at the woman, alone, vulnerable. What if something happens to her? A quiet voice inside him asked. He closed his eyes briefly and exhaled. "All right," he said finally. "I'll take a quick look." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Adekunle walked to the front of the car and lifted the bonnet. His hands moved with familiarity, instinct guiding him. He listened carefully, checked connections, adjusted a loose component. Time slipped away. Finally, he stepped back. "Try it now." The woman turned the key. The engine came alive. She gasped in relief, laughter escaping her lips. "It's working, thank you." "Oh, thank you." Adekunle nodded, already backing away. "I really have to go, please," she said quickly, stepping out. "Let me give you a ride." "I owe you." He shook his head. "I'm going the opposite direction. It's fine." She studied him for a moment, noticing his file, his sweat, the urgency in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he replied firmly. "Please just go." She nodded slowly. "Thank you again. Truly." Adekunle didn't wait. He turned and ran. His lungs burned, his legs screamed. He ran with everything he had left. By the time he reached the gates of Metro Petrochem Industries, he was drenched in sweat and barely breathing. He staggered inside, approaching the reception desk. "I'm here for the interview," he said hoarsely. The receptionist looked at the clock, then at him. "You're late," she said flatly. 30 minutes late." "Please," Adekunle begged. "Something happened on the road. Please, She raised a hand. "This company values punctuality. You're not eligible." The words fell like stones. Adekunle stood frozen as she turned away. Slowly, he walked back outside. He stopped beneath a tree, clutching his file as tears burned his eyes. "God," he whispered, voice breaking. "What did I do wrong?" He didn't know it yet, but the woman whose car he fixed that morning was already walking into a boardroom, one decision away from changing his life forever. Adekunle remained under the tree long after the glass doors of Metro Petrochem closed behind him. The world moved on around him, cars passed. People hurried by, voices floated in the air, but he stood still, holding his brown file as if it were the last proof that his life had once mattered. His chest felt tight. Not just from running, but from something deeper. The kind of pain that came when hope was lifted high, only to be slammed back down without mercy. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by his tears, even though no one seemed to notice. "I did the right thing," he whispered to himself. "I know I did." Yet knowing didn't make the pain disappear. He began the long walk home, each step heavier than the last. With every block he passed, doubt crept in louder. What if Zainab was right? What if kindness was a luxury meant only for people who could afford it? What if doing the right thing had finally destroyed what little chance he had left? By the time he reached his street, the sun was already high. Sweat clung to his shirt, but the heat he felt inside had nothing to do with the weather. Zainab was standing at the doorway when he arrived. She didn't smile. She didn't ask if he was okay. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, eyes sharp with expectation. So she said, "Did you get it?" Adekunle hesitated. "Just for a second." "They didn't interview me," he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean they didn't interview you?" "I was late," he admitted. "They said punctuality mattered more than explanations." Zainab stepped closer. "Late how?" Adekunle swallowed. "On my way there, I saw a woman stranded. Her car had broken down on a quiet road. She was alone and scared. I stopped to help her." For a moment, Zainab stared at him as if she hadn't heard correctly. Then she laughed, a short, bitter laugh that cut deeper than shouting ever could. "So let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You chose a stranger over your own future." "She was alone," Adekunle replied softly. "Anything could have happened to her." "And what about us?" Zainab snapped. "What about me? Did you think about what could happen to me when you threw away that interview?" "I didn't throw it away," he said, voice trembling. "I just couldn't leave her there." Zainab's anger exploded. "Kindness," she shouted. "Is kindness going to pay rent? Is kindness going to buy food? Is kindness going to give me the life I deserve?" Adekunle stood silent, every word hitting him like a slap. "You are foolish," she continued. "This is why your life is like this. You think being a good man is enough. Look at you, poor jobless and still playing the hero." "Please," Adekunle whispered, "don't speak to me like this." She pointed at him sharply. You lost that job because you don't think. You act like a child. I am tired, Adekunle. Tired of suffering with you. She turned away and walked into the room. Adekunle followed slowly, his heart pounding. He watched as she pulled a suitcase from under the bed and threw her clothes inside without care. Zainab, he said, panic rising. Please, let's talk. Talk about what? She replied coldly. About how my life has gone backwards since I married you. He fell to his knees. Please, he begged, I will fix this, I promise. Just give me time. She zipped the suitcase shut. I've given you enough time, she said. I want a better life. She walked toward the door. Adekunle crawled forward and grabbed her hand. Please don't leave me. She pulled away. Get a better life, Adekunle, she said. I can't wait anymore. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty room. Adekunle remained on the floor, shaking. His tears came freely, now soaking into the thin mat beneath him. I've lost everything, he whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. Days passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. Adekunle barely left the house. He sat alone, staring at the walls, replaying every decision that had led him there. A week later, a knock came at the door. He opened it to find a courier holding an envelope. This is for you, the man said. Adekunle took it with shaking hands. Inside were divorce papers and Zainab's wedding ring. His breath caught in his throat. He sank into a chair, clutching the ring tightly. She really left, he whispered. That night he sat in darkness, the weight of failure pressing down on him. But beneath the pain something else stirred, something stubborn and quiet. I cannot stay like this, he told himself. I must survive. The next morning, Adekunle stepped out early, searching for any work he could find. He went from shop to shop, asking politely. No vacancy. You look too educated, try somewhere else. By midday, exhaustion set in. But he kept walking. Eventually, he reached a construction site. Men were lifting blocks, mixing cement, shouting over the noise. It was hard, dirty work, but it was work. He approached the supervisor and bowed slightly. Please, sir, I am looking for a job. Any work at all? The man looked him over skeptically. You don't belong here. Please, Adekunle said. Just give me a chance. After a long pause, the supervisor nodded. Come tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. Adekunle's heart lifted slightly. As he walked home that evening, far across the city, the woman he had helped that morning sat at the head of a long boardroom table. Investors surrounded her. Contracts lay open before her. The deal was signed successfully. Yet even as applause filled the room, her mind drifted back to the man who had fixed her car. She remembered his urgency, his kindness, the way he had refused a ride. I hope he's okay, she whispered to herself. Neither of them knew it yet, but their paths were far from finished crossing. The next morning, Adekunle woke before dawn. The sky outside was still dark, the air cool and heavy with silence. For a brief moment, he lay on the thin mat, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the strength he had promised himself the night before was still there. His body ached from grief more than hunger, but he pushed himself up anyway. He had no choice. At the construction site, work did not wait for broken hearts. By the time Adekunle arrived, the horizon was beginning to glow. Men were already gathering, some laughing, some yawning, some silently preparing their tools. The supervisor glanced at his wristwatch as Adekunle approached. You're early, the man said gruffly. Yes, sir, Adekunle replied. Without another word, the supervisor waved him toward a pile of blocks. Start there. And just like that, Adekunle's new life began. The work was brutal. He lifted heavy concrete blocks until his arms trembled. He mixed cement with a shovel that felt heavier with every scoop. Dust coated his skin, his hair, his lungs. Sweat ran down his face in thick streams, stinging his eyes. By mid-morning, his back screamed in protest. Muscles he had never truly used before now pushed to their limits. Yet he did not stop. Each time his body begged him to rest, he thought of the silence Zainab had left behind. He thought of the closed interview doors. He thought of the ring sitting alone on the table. Pain, he realized, was no longer something to fear. It was simply part of survival. At noon, the men took a short break. Adekunle sat under a small tree pulling out a simple snack he had bought with the last of his coins. As he ate slowly, he watched the others joke and share food. Some complained loudly about the heat. Others spoke about their families. Adekunle said nothing. His thoughts drifted back to the boardroom he had never entered, the office chair he had never sat in. Just weeks ago, he had worn clean shirts and spoken confidently about engineering systems. Now his hands were cracked and bleeding. Still, he did not regret helping the woman. That truth surprised him. When work ended that evening, the supervisor handed Adekunle his pay for the day. It was small, almost insulting compared to what he once earned. But Adekunle accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, sir," he said sincerely. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. "You won't last long here if you keep thanking people," he muttered. Adekunle smiled faintly. "I will try my best." Days turned into weeks. Every morning Adekunle arrived before sunrise. Every evening he returned home exhausted, his clothes stiff with cement, his hands swollen. Some nights hunger gnawed at his stomach so fiercely that sleep became difficult. But he endured, and in the quiet moments hope refused to die. Even after a full day of hard labor, Adekunle still ironed his shirt carefully at night. He still arranged his CV neatly inside his brown file. On certain evenings, when his legs could carry him no farther, he visited nearby offices, submitting applications politely. "Please," he would say, "I am available immediately." Some took his papers without looking at him. Others waved him away. Yet he kept going. Across the city, Madame Adebayo's life moved at a very different pace. Her mornings began in a quiet luxury apartment. Her driver waited downstairs every day, door opened before she even reached the car. Meetings filled her schedule from dawn until late evening. Phone calls, documents, negotiations, her world was built on decisions that affected thousands of lives. And still she thought of Adekunle. Sometimes it was his eyes that came to mind, the mixture of urgency and kindness. Other times it was the way he had refused her offer of a ride even when he was clearly desperate. "Who does that?" she asked herself one morning as the car glided through traffic. Who helps a stranger and asks for nothing? In her world, favors were always exchanged for something else. Yet that man had asked for nothing. As the government housing project progressed, Madame Adebayo became more involved. The deal she had signed that day, the same day Adekunle missed his interview, was one of the biggest of her career. It demanded her full attention. Plans were drawn, budgets approved, contractors selected, construction sites began to emerge across the city. Back at his own site, Adekunle adapted slowly. His body grew stronger, his movements more efficient. Other workers began to notice his discipline. When machines broke down, Adekunle often found himself staring at them thoughtfully. One afternoon, a cement mixer stalled. The workers cursed and stepped back. Adekunle examined it quietly, adjusted a loose belt, and restarted it. The machine roared back to life. The men stared at him. "Where did you learn that?" one asked. "I studied engineering," Adekunle replied simply. From that day on, the workers looked at him differently. Though still treated as a laborer, he was no longer invisible. Weeks later, the supervisor announced a change. "We're moving to a new site," he told the team. "Pack up." The next morning, they loaded their tools onto an old truck and traveled to a wide, dusty area at the edge of the city. Piles of sand and iron rods lay scattered across the land. It was clear this project had just begun. Adekunle stepped down from the truck and wiped his brow. Work resumed immediately. Under the blazing sun, Adekunle pushed wheelbarrows filled with sand until his arms shook. He lifted blocks even when pain shot through his back. During breaks, he sat quietly conserving energy. One day as he ate beneath a small tree, he felt a sudden sharp pain along his spine. He winced but said nothing. He couldn't afford weakness. That same week, Madame Adebayo made a decision. She would visit the construction sites herself, not because she didn't trust her contractors, but because something inside her urged her to see the work firsthand. She wanted to know where her money was going. She wanted to see the people behind the progress. Her driver drove her to the largest site early one morning. When she stepped out of the car, conversation stopped. Workers straightened their backs. Supervisors rushed forward. "Good morning, madam," they greeted in unison. She nodded calmly. "Take me around." As she walked through the site, dust swirling around her polished shoes. She listened carefully to reports of progress. Her personal assistant scribbled notes beside her. Then suddenly she stopped. Her gaze fixed on a man near a cement pile. He was mixing cement with intense focus, his shirt soaked with sweat, muscles straining beneath the effort. His face was leaner than before, his eyes tired but unmistakable. Her heart skipped. "It's him," she whispered. The personal assistant looked confused. Madame Adebayo did not answer. She stepped closer. At that same moment, Adekunle straightened up and wiped his face. He noticed a well-dressed woman standing nearby, her presence commanding attention. Something about her seemed familiar. Their eyes met. Recognition dawned slowly. "Good afternoon," she said softly. "Do you remember me?" Adekunle stared, unsure. Then it hit him. "The car," he said quietly. "You're the woman from that morning." She smiled gently. "Yes." For a moment, the noise of the construction site faded. Two lives once connected by a single act of kindness had found each other again, buried beneath dust, pain, and unanswered questions. Neither of them yet understood what this meeting would unlock. Adekunle stood frozen, the shovel still in his hand, unsure whether to bow, speak, or step back. Dust clung to his skin, his shirt darkened with sweat. Standing before him was a woman who looked as though she belonged to a completely different world. Calm, composed, surrounded by authority, Madame Adebayo studied him quietly. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Not just the tiredness of hard labor, but the deeper weariness of a man who had carried too much disappointment for too long. "You helped me once," she said softly. "On a road where no one else stopped." Adekunle nodded, embarrassed. "It was nothing, madam." She shook her head. "It was not nothing." "Please, may we talk for a moment?" The supervisor hurried forward, nervous. "Madam, if there is any issue—" "There is no issue," she said calmly. "I would like to speak with him privately." The supervisor nodded immediately. "Of course, madam." Adekunle gestured toward a small tree at the edge of the site. "There is some shade over there." They walked together side by side. Her assistant stayed behind, watching from a distance. When they reached the tree, an old wooden bench waited beneath it. They sat. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The noise of the construction site continued in the background, metal clanging, men shouting, but under the tree there was a strange stillness. Madame Adebayo broke it. "What is your name?" she asked gently. "Adekunle," he replied. "Adekunle," she repeated slowly. "I have been thinking about you since that morning." He looked surprised. "Madam, you were in a hurry," she continued. "I could see it. And yet you stopped. You refused a ride. You asked for nothing. I couldn't understand it." Adekunle lowered his gaze. "I just did what I thought was right." She studied his hands, rough, scarred, trembling slightly from fatigue. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. "You do not look like someone who belongs on a construction site." Adekunle inhaled deeply. It is a long story, he said. I have time, she replied. Something in her voice, patient, sincere, made his chest tighten. No one had asked him that question in a long time. No one had truly listened. So he began. He spoke of university days, of being one of the best students in his class. He spoke of the job he loved, the career he had built, the pride he once felt wearing clean shirts and solving complex problems. Then his voice shifted. He told her about the company's collapse, the endless job applications, the rejections, the silence. He spoke of his marriage, how love slowly turned into disappointment, then contempt, how the woman he married began to see him as a burden rather than a partner. Madame Adebayo listened without interruption. Adekunle's voice dropped lower. The morning I met you, he said, I was going for an interview. A very important one. The kind that could change everything. Her eyes widened slightly. I was already late, he continued. But when I saw you there, alone, I couldn't leave. He swallowed hard. I fixed your car. I ran. But when I arrived, they sent me away. They didn't even let me explain. Madame Adebayo's hand moved to her chest. That was the last chance, Adekunle said softly. When my wife heard why I missed it, she left. A week later, she sent the divorce papers. For a moment, he couldn't continue. There are days I don't eat, he added quietly. But I keep working. I keep hoping. Because if I lose hope, then everything is truly over. Silence followed. Madame Adebayo looked away, blinking back, something dangerously close to tears. She had heard many stories of hardship in her life, but this one cut deeper. Not because of tragedy alone, but because of the dignity with which it was told. You studied engineering, she asked. Yes, madam. Petrochemical engineering. She nodded slowly as if fitting pieces together. Adekunle, she said after a long pause. Do you know what would have happened if you had not stopped for me that morning? He shook his head. I would have been stranded for hours, she said. I would have missed a deal worth millions, a deal that now feeds thousands of families. She turned to face him fully. You lost everything because you chose kindness. And that is not fair. Adekunle looked up, startled. Madam, life is not always fair. She smiled faintly. No, but sometimes it gives us a chance to correct what is wrong. She reached into her handbag and brought out a business card. She held it out to him. Take this. He hesitated before accepting it with both hands. Call me tomorrow morning, she said. I want to help you. Adekunle stared at the card, then at her. Madam. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, she replied. Just call. She stood smoothing her dress, her face now resolved. You helped me without knowing who I was. Let me return that kindness with intention. As she walked away, Adekunle remained seated, staring at the card as though it might vanish. That night, Madame Adebayo did not rest. She walked straight into her study and made a call. I need you to prepare an interview, she said firmly. A real one, based on skill, not time. On the other side of the city, Adekunle lay awake, the business card pressed against his chest, hope stirring once more. Adekunle barely slept that night. He lay on his thin mat, staring at the ceiling as shadows shifted with the faint glow of the streetlight outside. The business card rested in his palm, its edges slightly bent from how tightly he had been holding it. Every few minutes he looked at it again, as if the words might change or disappear. Madame Adebayo. Her name echoed in his mind. For weeks his nights had been filled with regret and unanswered questions. But this night felt different. It wasn't peace yet, but it wasn't despair either. It was something fragile and dangerous. Hope. At dawn, Adekunle rose quietly. His body protested as he stood, muscles stiff from yesterday's labor, but his mind was already racing ahead. He washed, dressed for the construction site, and ate nothing. Food was scarce, but anticipation filled the space hunger usually occupied. He worked that morning as if nothing had changed. He lifted blocks. He mixed cement. He pushed wheelbarrows beneath the harsh sun. But inside him, something burned brighter than fatigue. Every task felt lighter, not because it was easier, but because it no longer felt pointless. The supervisor noticed. "You're quiet today," the man remarked. "But you're working faster." Adekunle nodded. "Yes, sir." By midday, his hands were shaking, not from exhaustion alone, but from waiting. When the final whistle blew that evening, Adekunle cleaned himself as best he could. He returned home, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at the phone for a long time. Then he dialed. It rang once. "Good morning," a calm voice answered. "This is Adebayo." "Good morning, Madam," Adekunle said quickly. "It's Adekunle. You asked me to call." "Yes," she replied. "Thank you for calling." "Can you come to my office this morning? Bring your CV." Adekunle froze. "Your office?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said. "I will send you the address now." The line went dead. Adekunle stared at the phone, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the neighbors could hear it. His hands trembled as the message arrived with the address, one of the most prestigious business districts in the city. He sprang into action. From his small cupboard, he pulled out his best shirt, the same one he had worn to the interview he never got to attend. He washed it carefully, ironed it until it was crisp, and polished his shoes as best he could. He arranged his CV neatly in the brown file that had become both burden and blessing. As he stepped out, he whispered a prayer. "God, if this is real, please don't let it slip away." The bus ride felt endless. Every stop stole his breath. When he finally arrived, Adekunle stood across the street and stared. The building was tall, modern, and intimidating. Glass reflected the sky. Security guards stood at the entrance. People in suits walked in and out with purpose. He swallowed and crossed the road. Inside, a receptionist greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning," Adekunle replied, forcing calm into his voice. "I have an appointment with Madame Adebayo." She smiled. "Your name, please." "Adekunle Mensah." She pressed a button on the intercom. "Madam, Mr. Mensah is here." A moment later, she nodded. "Please follow me." Adekunle's heart raced as he followed her down a quiet hallway into a spacious office flooded with light. Madame Adebayo stood as he entered. "Adekunle," she said warmly. "Welcome." "Thank you, madam," he replied, bowing slightly. "Please sit," she said. "You're exactly on time." Those words alone almost brought tears to his eyes. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "You may come in now." Moments later, a man in a dark suit entered. "This is the general manager of my petrochemical company," she said. "He will speak with you." Adekunle's breath caught. The general manager shook his hand firmly. "Let's talk." They moved to another office. The interview that followed was nothing like the one Adekunle had imagined for months. There was no rushing, no dismissal, no cold glances at the clock. They asked about his experience, his ideas, his understanding of systems and safety. They questioned his past work, his approach to problem-solving, his ability to lead. Adekunle answered calmly, confidently, like a man remembering who he truly was. The general manager leaned back in his chair. "You have strong experience," he said. "Very strong." After a few final questions, he stood and smiled. "Congratulations, Adekunle. You're hired." Adekunle froze. "You will be joining us as technical manager of the engineering department," the man continued. "Madame Adebayo believes in you, and now so do I." Tears blurred Adekunle's vision. Later, back in Madame Adebayo's office, Adekunle stood silently as gratitude overwhelmed him. "Madam," he whispered, "thank you. I don't even know how to." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Your kindness was not wasted, she said. You helped me without knowing who I was. That morning you saved more than my car. You saved a future. Adekunle bowed his head, tears streaming freely now. Go, she said softly. Build your life again, and build it he did. Within weeks, Adekunle moved into a clean apartment provided by the company. He was given a car, responsibilities, and respect. His ideas improved efficiency. His leadership inspired teams. Life rose faster than anyone expected. One evening, as he stood on the balcony of his new home, Adekunle looked at the city lights below and whispered, "Thank you." Far away in a small apartment, Zainab scrolled through her phone. She stopped. Her eyes widened. There he was, Adekunle, smiling, standing in front of a beautiful home, successful. Her hands shook. "What have I done?" she whispered, tears falling freely. She had left when life was hard, and now life had rewarded the man she abandoned. Zainab stared at her phone long after the screen went dark. The image of Adekunle standing in front of a beautiful home refused to leave her mind. He looked different, stronger, calmer, confident in a way she had never seen before. Not the broken man she had shouted at, not the desperate husband she had walked away from. This was a man who had risen, and she had not been there to see it. Her chest tightened as memories flooded back. The insults, the anger, the day she packed her suitcase without looking back. At the time, she had told herself she was choosing survival. She believed she deserved more than struggle, more than uncertainty, more than waiting. Now, sitting alone in her small apartment, she wondered if she had made the greatest mistake of her life. "What if I had stayed?" she whispered. Sleep did not come easily that night. By morning, regret had hardened into resolve. Zainab dressed carefully, choosing her best clothes, practicing words of apology she had never thought she would say. She packed a small bag just in case. Deep down, she hoped there was still a door open for her. She began to search, through mutual contacts, through old addresses, through quiet inquiries that bruised her pride. Eventually, she found what she was looking for, an address tied to Adekunle's name, located in one of the city's most respected neighborhoods. Her heart pounded as she approached the tall gates later that afternoon. The house was even more beautiful in person. Clean walls, well-kept gardens, security cameras watching silently. Everything about the place spoke of stability, of peace. Zainab felt small. She approached the gate and spoke to the security guard. "Please," she said softly, "tell your boss that Zainab is here to see him." The guard studied her carefully before making a call. "Wait here," he said. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the gate opened slightly and Adekunle stepped out. For a moment, Zainab could not breathe. He looked at her calmly. No shock, no anger. Just quiet recognition. Her knees gave way. She dropped to the ground. "Adekunle," she cried, tears streaming freely. "I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I was blind. I was foolish. I didn't know what I was doing." She reached for his legs, clinging to them like someone drowning. "Please," she sobbed. "Take me back. I will change. I swear I will." "I was wrong." Adekunle looked down at her silently. There was a time when this scene would have shattered him, a time when one word from her could have given him life again. But that man no longer existed. He felt no anger, no desire for revenge, only clarity. "Zainab," he said gently, "please stand up." She looked up at him, hope trembling in her eyes. "I forgave you a long time ago," he continued. "I had to forgive you so I could heal." Her crying intensified. "Then please, let us start again." Adekunle shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Some things cannot be rebuilt once they are broken." He stepped back and went inside the house. Moments later, he returned holding a brown envelope. "This is the divorce document," he said, handing it to her. "I've signed it." Zainab's hands trembled as she took it. I wish you well, Adekunle added softly. But my life has moved forward. He turned and walked back into his home. The gate closed behind him. Zainab remained on the ground sobbing as the weight of her choices finally settled on her shoulders. Across the city, Adekunle sat quietly in his living room, breathing deeply. He did not feel victorious. He did not feel proud. He felt free. The weeks that followed were filled with growth. At work, Adekunle proved himself beyond expectation. He identified inefficiencies others had ignored. He introduced safer processes, smarter systems, and clearer communication. The engineering department thrived under his leadership. Madame Adebayo noticed everything. One afternoon, she called him into her office. "You have changed this company," she said simply. "Your ideas have saved us millions." Adekunle bowed his head humbly. "Thank you, madam." She slid a document across the table. "You are now part of the executive decision-making body." Adekunle's eyes widened. With a raise, she added, Tears welled up again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not pain. He bought a house. He invested wisely. He supported his family back home. He became known not just as a successful man, but as a kind one, a fair one. Yet he never forgot the road that led him there. He never forgot the morning he stopped for a stranger. And he never forgot the lesson life had taught him, that true character is revealed not when life is easy, but when it is painfully hard. Years later, when people asked him how he made it, Adekunle would smile and say, "Only this: I chose kindness when it cost me everything. And in time it gave me more than I ever imagined." After Zainab left his gate in tears, Adekunle did not celebrate. That surprised him. For a long time he had imagined this moment, her regret, her realization, the chance to finally feel vindicated. Yet when it happened, there was no rush of triumph, no hunger to prove anything. What he felt instead was a quiet stillness, the kind that comes only after a long storm has finally passed. That night, Adekunle sat alone in his living room, lights dimmed, listening to the city breathe beyond his windows. Cars moved in the distance. Somewhere, laughter floated through the air. Life was continuing just as it always had. Only now he was no longer chasing it. For the first time in years, Adekunle slept deeply. Not because his problems were gone, but because the fear that once ruled his decisions had finally loosened its grip. The next morning he woke early, not out of anxiety, but out of habit. He prepared for work, calmly dressed neatly, and drove himself to the office in the company car, still parked neatly in his driveway. Each movement felt intentional, unhurried, grounded. At the office, respect followed him wherever he went. Engineers greeted him with confidence. Technicians sought his opinion before acting. Meetings that once intimidated him now felt like conversations among equals. Adekunle spoke less than many, but when he did, people listened. Not because of his title, but because of his clarity. In meetings, he focused on solutions rather than blame. He asked questions others avoided. He challenged processes that wasted resources or endangered workers. When disagreements arose, he did not raise his voice. He raised standards. Madame Adebayo watched all of this carefully. She noticed how morale improved under Adekunle's leadership. She noticed how younger engineers began staying late, not out of fear, but out of inspiration. She noticed how problems that had lingered for years were suddenly being resolved. One afternoon, she invited Adekunle to walk with her around the company's main facility. "You are different from many men I've worked with," she said thoughtfully. Adekunle smiled politely. "In what way, madam?" "You lead without needing to be loud," she replied. "You correct without humiliating. And you work as though you are grateful for the opportunity, not entitled to it." Adekunle nodded. "I know what it means to lose everything," he said. "I don't want to forget." She stopped walking and looked at him carefully. "Don't," she said. "That memory will keep you human." Outside of work, life also began to take on a new rhythm. Adekunle reconnected with friends he had withdrawn from during his darkest days. Some were shocked to see how much he had changed, not just in success, but in spirit. He laughed more easily now. He listened more. He no longer rushed conversations as if time itself were chasing him. On weekends, he visited his family back home. His mother cried the first time she saw him step out of the car in clean clothes, shoulders relaxed, eyes bright. "You look peaceful," she said, holding his face in her hands. "I am learning to be," he replied. He helped pay his younger siblings' school fees. He fixed the leaking roof of his parents' house. He did these things quietly, without announcement, without pride. Each act felt like a small repair, not just to their lives, but to his own sense of purpose. Yet even as life improved, memories still visited him. Sometimes late at night, Adekunle remembered the construction site, the dust, the pain in his back, the hunger. The way hope had felt like something fragile he carried in his pocket, afraid it might fall and shatter. Those memories did not haunt him. They grounded him. One evening, as he reviewed documents at home, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. "Good evening," a hesitant voice said. "Sir, my name is Daniel. I work at the construction site where you used to work." Adekunle sat up. "Yes, Daniel. How are you?" There was a pause. "Sir, the men still talk about you," Daniel said, "about how you never complained, about how you fixed machines even when it wasn't your job." Adekunle felt a tightness in his chest. "We wanted to ask," Daniel continued, "if you could help us. The supervisor has been cheating some of the men on their pay." Adekunle listened carefully as Daniel explained. When the call ended, Adekunle sat silently for a long time. The old version of him would have hesitated, afraid of getting involved, afraid of risking his position. But fear no longer ruled him. The next day, Adekunle spoke with Madame Adebayo. She listened without interrupting. "Let me handle it," she said calmly. "No one should suffer in silence." Within days, an investigation was launched. The supervisor was removed. Fair payment systems were introduced. Safety conditions were improved. When Daniel called back, his voice trembled with relief. "Thank you, sir," he said. "You didn't forget us." Adekunle closed his eyes briefly. "I never could," he replied. That night, standing on his balcony, Adekunle reflected on how strange life could be. Once he had believed success meant security, money, status, comfort. Now he understood something deeper. Success meant becoming someone who could lift others without losing himself. The city lights shimmered below him. Somewhere another man was running through traffic with a brown file pressed to his chest. Somewhere a woman was stranded on a roadside, praying someone kind would stop. Somewhere a choice was being made that would shape a lifetime. Adekunle whispered into the quiet night. "Choose well." He did not know what the future held, but for the first time he trusted that whatever came next, he would face it not with fear but with integrity. And that he had learned was the greatest wealth of all. Success settled into Adekunle's life quietly, not with fireworks or loud celebration, but with consistency. Each morning he arrived at work early, not because he feared being late, but because he respected the opportunity he had been given. His office overlooked part of the facility where machines hummed steadily, where workers in helmets moved with purpose. From time to time he paused to watch them, remembering what it felt like to stand among them with aching muscles and empty pockets. He never allowed himself to forget. At meetings, Adekunle spoke with calm authority. He proposed systems that reduced waste and improved safety. He listened to junior engineers with the same attention he gave senior managers. When mistakes happened, he corrected them without humiliation. People noticed. "Working under him feels different," one engineer said quietly to another. "He doesn't scare you. He makes you better." The company's growth reflected that change. Production increased. Accidents dropped. Morale improved. Investors praised the efficiency. Madame Adebayo received commendations from partners and government officials alike. But praise was not what interested Adekunle. What mattered to him was trust. One afternoon, Madame Adebayo called him into her office again. She closed the door behind him, an unusual sign of privacy. "Adekunle," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Do you remember the housing project I told you about?" "Yes, madam," he replied. "I want you to oversee part of the technical implementation," she said. "Not just the engineering, but the people." Adekunle's brows furrowed slightly. "The people, yes," she said. "I want someone who understands what it means to work from the ground up, someone who will not exploit laborers or overlook safety. Someone who knows what hunger feels like." She looked at him intently. "I believe that person is you." Adekunle felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the same mixture of humility and responsibility he had felt the day he was hired. "I will do my best," he said quietly, and he did. At the housing sites, Adekunle walked the grounds personally. He spoke with workers, listened to their concerns, corrected supervisors who tried to cut corners. When he saw unsafe practices, he shut them down immediately, even if it delayed progress. "Lives are not negotiable," he said firmly. Some contractors complained, others resisted, but Madame Adebayo stood behind him fully. Within months, the housing units began to rise, solid, safe, affordable. Families lined up to apply. Children ran through unfinished corridors laughing. Adekunle watched from a distance, heart full. This was impact. Outside of work, life continued to reshape itself. Adekunle redecorated his home slowly, intentionally. He did not rush to fill it with expensive items. Instead, he chose simplicity. A comfortable couch, a small bookshelf, framed photos of family. The brown file, the same one he once clutched in desperation, now sat neatly on a shelf, a reminder of where he had been. Occasionally, loneliness visited him. In the evenings, when the house was quiet and the city lights flickered beyond the windows, Adekunle sometimes felt the absence of a partner. Not Zainab specifically, but the idea of sharing life with someone who would stay when things were uncertain. He did not rush to fill that space. He had learned that desperation made poor decisions. Instead, he focused on becoming whole. One Saturday afternoon, Adekunle attended a small community event organized by former colleagues from the construction site. They invited him as a guest of honor, though he insisted he did not deserve the title. When he arrived, men stood up to greet him with smiles and respect. "This man understands us," someone said proudly. Adekunle spoke briefly, encouraging them to value their skills, to protect their health, to demand fairness. He did not promise miracles. He promised honesty. After the event, a young man approached him hesitantly. "Sir," he said, "I'm studying engineering, but my parents want me to quit because they say it's too hard." Adekunle smiled gently. "It is hard," he said, "but hard things shape strong people." The young man nodded, eyes shining. Moments like that reminded Adekunle why his journey mattered beyond himself. Yet even as his life stabilized, the past had not entirely released its grip. One evening, as he reviewed reports at home, his phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was short. "I hope you are well. I think of you often." No name. Adekunle stared at the screen for a long moment. He did not need to ask who it was. Zainab. His chest tightened, not with longing but with clarity. He typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally, he locked his phone and set it aside. Some doors once closed were meant to remain closed. That night, Adekunle dreamed of the road where everything had changed. The quiet street, the broken car, the moment of hesitation. In the dream, he stood again with his watch in hand, heart racing. But this time, when he chose to help, there was no fear, only peace. He woke with a sense of calm resolve. The next day at work, Madame Adebayo shared news of a major expansion. The company would open a new branch in another region, creating hundreds of jobs. I want you to help select the leadership team, she said. Adekunle nodded. We must choose wisely. Yes, she agreed. Skill matters, but character matters more. As the days passed, Adekunle realized something important. His life was no longer defined by what he had lost. It was defined by what he had become. A man who could stand in power without forgetting humility. A man who could lead without crushing others. A man who understood that true success was not about arriving, but about who you lift along the way. Standing at the window of his office one evening, Adekunle watched the sun dip below the skyline. The machines below slowed. Workers began to leave, laughter echoing faintly. He whispered to himself, I am not afraid anymore. And that realization, more than money or position, felt like victory as the company prepared for expansion. Adekunle found himself standing at another crossroads, one that did not involve poverty or desperation, but something far more subtle. Power. The new branch would require a leadership team, managers, engineers, supervisors. Names were proposed daily, files placed on his desk, recommendations whispered in hallways. Many of the candidates were qualified on paper. Some were brilliant, others were politically connected. A few were simply ambitious enough to push themselves forward. Madame Adebayo had made one thing clear. Choose people who will protect the company when no one is watching, she said. Not just those who look impressive in meetings. Adekunle took that responsibility seriously. Each evening after work hours, he stayed behind to study applications. He read beyond certificates and achievements. He paid attention to employment gaps, to patterns of behavior, to how candidates spoke about previous teams. He invited some of them in not for formal interviews, but for conversations. He asked unexpected questions. How do you treat people who work under you? What do you do when a junior makes a costly mistake? Have you ever sacrificed profit to protect safety? Some answered smoothly, clearly prepared for the usual corporate games. Others stumbled, revealing more than they intended. One candidate stood out for the wrong reasons. His name was Ibrahim Okoye. On paper, Ibrahim was impressive, top schools, years of experience, confident references. In meetings, he spoke eloquently about efficiency and control. He impressed many members of the board. But something about him unsettled Adekunle. During a site visit, Adekunle watched Ibrahim speak to a group of technicians. His tone was sharp, dismissive. When one young man tried to explain a potential safety concern, Ibrahim cut him off. Just do your job, he snapped. Leave thinking to management. Adekunle felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Later that day, he called Ibrahim into his office. You were hard on your team today, Adekunle said calmly. They need discipline, Ibrahim replied. That's how results are achieved in safety, Adekunle asked. What about listening when someone raises a concern? Ibrahim shrugged. Fear slows productivity. Adekunle leaned back in his chair, studying him quietly. No, he said at last. Fear destroys trust. Ibrahim smiled thinly. With respect, sir, trust doesn't build companies, control does. That was enough. When the leadership list was finalized, Ibrahim's name was missing. The backlash came quickly. Whispers spread. Some accused Adekunle of favoritism. Others questioned his judgment. Why reject someone so qualified? A board member asked during a meeting. Adekunle answered calmly, because qualification without character is dangerous. Madame Adebayo watched him closely. After the meeting, she called him aside. You made enemies today, she said. Adekunle nodded. I know. She smiled slightly. Then you're doing something right. The new branch launched successfully. Teams were led by individuals who respected laborers, prioritized safety, and worked collaboratively. Productivity grew steadily, not through fear, but through trust. Adekunle visited the new site one afternoon, walking through rows of active workspaces. Workers greeted him warmly. Supervisors reported honestly both successes and problems. "This feels different," one engineer said. "People aren't afraid to speak up." Adekunle nodded. That's the goal. Outside of work, life continued to stretch him in unexpected ways. One evening, he received a message from his younger brother back home. "Big brother," the message read. "Some men came today. They said you should invest in a business with them. They used your name." Adekunle frowned. He called immediately. The men were distant acquaintances, people who had ignored him when he was struggling, now eager to attach themselves to his success. They spoke grandly about profits, quick returns, influence. Adekunle listened patiently. Then he declined. "I don't invest in things I don't understand," he said. "And I don't partner with people I don't trust." The calls stopped. That night, Adekunle reflected on how quickly the world changed its posture once you succeeded. How doors opened not because people believed in you, but because they believed in what you could give them. He was careful not to confuse attention with loyalty. Weeks later, as he prepared to leave the office one evening, his assistant hesitated at the door. "Sir," she said softly, "there is someone asking to see you." Adekunle frowned. "Do I have an appointment?" "No, sir," she replied, "but she says it's important." Adekunle sighed. "Who is it?" "She didn't give a name," the assistant said. "But she said you once shared a life." Adekunle closed his eyes briefly. "Let her in," he said. Zainab stepped into the office slowly. She looked different, thinner, quieter. The confidence she once wore so loudly was gone. She stood awkwardly, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the floor. "Adekunle," she said softly. "Zainab," he replied evenly. "What do you want?" She swallowed. "I just wanted to see you, to know you are well." "I am," he said simply. Silence stretched between them. "I lost my job," she said finally. "Things didn't go as I planned." Adekunle listened without reacting. "I know I don't deserve your help," she continued. "I know I hurt you. I just thought maybe you could advise me." He looked at her for a long moment. "You once told me kindness was useless," he said calmly. "Do you still believe that?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "I was wrong." Adekunle stood. "I cannot fix your life, Zainab," he said gently. "But I can tell you this: run toward integrity, not comfort. Choose people who stay when things are hard, and become someone you respect even when no one is watching." She nodded, tears falling freely. "Thank you," she whispered. She left quietly. Adekunle sat back down, his chest heavy but not wounded. He realized then that healing did not mean forgetting. It meant responding without bitterness. That night, standing on his balcony once more, Adekunle reflected on how far he had come. Poverty had tested his endurance. Success had tested his humility. Power was testing his character. And each time, the same principle guided him. Do what is right even when it costs you. The city lights shimmered below. Somewhere, decisions were being made. Some would be driven by fear, others by greed. Adekunle whispered into the night, "Let mine be guided by conscience." For he had learned this truth the hard way. It is not adversity that reveals who you are. It is opportunity. Life no longer shouted at Adekunle the way it once had. Instead, it tested him in whispers. As the months passed, his responsibilities deepened. The expansion project matured, deadlines tightened, and expectations rose. With growth came pressure, the kind that did not break bones or empty stomachs, but slowly weighed on conscience. One afternoon, Adekunle received a call from a regional contractor assigned to one of the housing developments. "Sir," the man said confidently, "we can reduce costs significantly if we adjust a few material specifications. No one will notice. The buildings will still stand." Adekunle listened in silence. "And the safety margins?" he asked calmly. The contractor hesitated. They will be slightly lower, but still acceptable. Adekunle closed his eyes briefly. I want it done by the book, he said. Every specification. No shortcuts. There was a pause. With respect, sir, the contractor replied, that will cost more. It will delay completion. Adekunle's voice remained steady. Then we delay. The line went quiet before the contractor responded. Understood. When Adekunle ended the call, he leaned back in his chair, feeling the familiar ache in his chest, the ache that came from choosing what was right over what was easy. Later that evening, Madame Adebayo stopped by his office. I heard about the contractor, she said. Adekunle nodded. He wanted to cut corners. And you said no. Yes. She smiled faintly. Good, because those houses will hold families, children, lives. Adekunle exhaled slowly. That's exactly what I was thinking. It was in moments like these that he realized something profound. Integrity was not loud. It did not announce itself. It simply required consistency again and again, especially when no one was clapping. Outside of work, Adekunle's life continued to unfold quietly. He began mentoring a small group of young engineer students and recent graduates struggling to find their footing. They met once a month, sitting in a modest conference room, sharing stories, fears, and questions. One evening, a young woman named Amara spoke up. Sir, she said, I keep getting rejected. Sometimes I wonder if I should compromise my values just to get ahead. Adekunle looked at her carefully. There will always be shortcuts, he said. And some people will seem to rise faster because of them. But shortcuts demand payment later, sometimes with interest. The room fell silent. If you succeed by becoming someone you don't respect, he continued, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to escape that person. Amara nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. That night, as Adekunle drove home, her question lingered in his mind. He remembered how close he had come to bitterness. How easy it would have been to blame the world for his suffering. How tempting it would have been to harden his heart. But he hadn't. And that choice, more than any promotion, had shaped his future. One weekend, Adekunle visited the old neighborhood where he once lived with Zainab. The buildings looked smaller now, the streets narrower, but the memories felt heavy. He parked the car and walked slowly. At a small roadside stall, he saw a man arguing loudly with a vendor over payment. The vendor, a young boy, looked frightened. Adekunle stepped closer. Is there a problem? He asked gently. The man turned sharply. Mind your business. Adekunle held his ground. The boy deserves to be paid for his work. The man scoffed. Who are you? Adekunle smiled faintly. Someone who knows what hunger feels like. After a tense moment, the man threw some money on the table and walked away, muttering. The boy looked up at Adekunle with wide eyes. Thank you, sir, he whispered. Adekunle nodded and walked away, heart heavy but resolved. As he drove off, he realized something else. Power, when used quietly, could still protect. Not long after, Adekunle received an invitation to speak at a professional conference. Leaders, engineers, policymakers all gathered to discuss innovation and growth. He stood at the podium looking out at rows of polished faces. I was once late to an interview, he began calmly. And I lost everything. The room stilled. I stopped to help a stranger, he continued. And for a long time it felt like kindness had punished me. Murmurs rippled through the audience. But life taught me something important, Adekunle said. Success is not built on speed alone. It is built on choices. And the choices we make when no one is watching shape the lives we live later. When he finished, the applause was warm, but restrained. Thoughtful. Afterward, several people approached him quietly, thanking him not for inspiration but for honesty. That night, Adekunle sat on his balcony once again, city lights stretching endlessly below. He thought of the road where everything had changed. He thought of the interview he missed. He thought of the woman whose car he fixed. And he thought of the man he had become. Life had not rewarded him because he was perfect. It had rewarded him because he had refused to become bitter. As the breeze moved gently around him, Adekunle whispered a prayer not for wealth, not for recognition, but for steadiness. "Let me remain human," he said softly, "no matter how far I go." Because he now understood this truth, the greatest test of success is not how high you climb, but how well you carry your values with you. By the time Adekunle realized how quiet his life had become, he understood that silence was no longer emptiness. It was stability. The frantic days of chasing opportunity had faded into a steady rhythm. Meeting site visits, mentoring sessions, long evenings spent reviewing plans and proposals. His name now carried weight in rooms where he once would not have been allowed to sit. And yet, despite all the progress, the past had not finished knocking. It arrived subtly. One afternoon, as Adekunle prepared to leave the office, his assistant approached with hesitation written across her face. "Sir," she said softly, "there's someone waiting downstairs. He says he knew you before." Adekunle paused. "Did he give a name?" She shook her head. "Only that it's important." Adekunle sighed. "Send him up." Moments later, a man stepped into the office, tall, sharply dressed, with an easy smile that felt practiced rather than genuine. "Adekunle," the man said warmly, spreading his arms. "It's been a long time." Adekunle studied him carefully. "Kola," he said at last. "I almost didn't recognize you." Kola laughed lightly. "Success changes people, my brother." Adekunle did not return the smile. "What brings you here?" Kola walked around the office, nodding approvingly at the furniture, the view, the quiet authority of the space. "I heard you've done very well for yourself," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Adekunle replied. "Now tell me why you're here." Kola stopped pacing and turned serious. "I have a business proposal," he said, "a very profitable one. All it needs is your backing." Adekunle folded his arms. "Go on." Kola explained quickly, too quickly. Land acquisition, rapid development, minimal oversight, maximum returns. It was the kind of deal that looked impressive on the surface and rotten underneath. "We can move fast," Kola said confidently. "With your influence, approvals will be easy. Everyone wins." Adekunle listened without interruption. "And the risks?" he asked calmly. Kola waved a hand dismissively. "Manageable. Nothing illegal, just flexible." Adekunle leaned back in his chair. "Kola," he said evenly, "where were you when I was sleeping on an empty stomach and working at a construction site?" Kola's smile faltered. "Life was busy then." "Yes," Adekunle agreed. "Life is always busy when people have nothing to gain." Silence stretched between them. "I'm not interested," Adekunle said at last. "My name will not be used to cut corners." Kola's expression hardened. "You think you're better than us now." "No," Adekunle replied calmly. "I think I've learned better." Kola scoffed. "Opportunities like this don't come often." "Neither does peace," Adekunle said. "And I won't trade one for the other." Kola left without another word. When the door closed, Adekunle exhaled slowly. The temptation had been real. The profit would have been enormous. But so would the cost. That evening, Adekunle met with Madame Adebayo for dinner, a rare invitation that carried more meaning than formality. "You've been quiet lately," she observed over the meal. "I've been tested," Adekunle replied. She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" He told her about Kola and the proposal. Madame Adebayo listened carefully, then nodded. "Success attracts two kinds of people," she said. "Those who respect your journey and those who want to exploit it." Adekunle smiled faintly. "I'm beginning to see that." She leaned forward. "You said no, yes." "Good," she said simply. That tells me everything I need to know. Later that night, Adekunle received a call from his mother. "My son," she said warmly, "people are talking about you here. They say you've forgotten nothing." Adekunle closed his eyes, emotion swelling in his chest. "I'm trying not to," he said softly. But the past was not finished. A few days later, a letter arrived, handwritten, unfamiliar handwriting, no return address. Adekunle opened it slowly. It was from Zainab. She wrote about her struggles, about the loneliness, about the choices she wished she could undo. She did not ask for money. She did not ask to return. She only asked for forgiveness again. Adekunle read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, he had learned, was not something you repeated endlessly for the sake of others. It was something you granted once for your own freedom. He did not reply. Instead, Adekunle turned his attention outward. He launched a small initiative within the company, an apprenticeship program for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. The kind of youths who reminded him of himself at his lowest point. He insisted the program focus not just on technical skills, but on ethics, discipline, and accountability. "We are not just building engineers," he told the team. "We are building citizens." The first group of apprentices arrived nervous and hopeful. Adekunle welcomed them personally. "I won't promise you an easy journey," he said, "but I promise you a fair one." Their eyes shone with possibility. One evening, as Adekunle drove home, traffic slowed unexpectedly. Cars lined the road, engines idling. He glanced at his watch out of habit, then smiled. He was no longer afraid of time. As the cars crawled forward, he noticed a vehicle pulled over ahead. Hazard lights blinking. A woman stood beside it, phone in hand, panic written across her face. Adekunle's heart skipped. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. He pulled over without hesitation. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The woman looked at him, relief flooding her features. "My car just stopped." "I don't know what to do." Adekunle nodded calmly. "Let's take a look." As he lifted the bonnet and examined the engine, he felt a quiet certainty settle over him. This time there was no interview waiting, no fear of losing everything, no desperation, only character. When the car started again, the woman thanked him repeatedly, offering money, offering a ride, offering anything she could think of. Adekunle smiled and shook his head. "Just help someone else when you can." As he drove away, the city lights glowing ahead, Adekunle understood something with absolute clarity. The true reward of his journey was not the house, the position, or the respect. It was this: he could choose kindness now without fear, and that was a freedom no money could buy. The morning after Adekunle stopped to help the stranded woman, he woke with a quiet smile. It wasn't pride, it wasn't nostalgia, it was certainty. For years, every act of kindness had felt like a risk, something that might cost him the little he had left. Now kindness felt natural again, unforced, free. It reminded him of who he had been before fear took control of his choices. At work, the day unfolded like many others. Meetings, site reports, emails stacked neatly in his inbox. But beneath the routine, something important was shifting. Madame Adebayo had been watching him closely, not just his decisions, but the consistency behind them. That afternoon, she called Adekunle into her office and closed the door. "I want to talk to you about the future," she said. Adekunle sat upright. "I'm listening." She folded her hands calmly. "The board has approved a long-term restructuring plan. New branches, new leadership, new responsibilities." Adekunle nodded slowly. "I want you to take on a larger role," she continued, "not just as a technical leader, but as a strategic one, someone whose values will shape this company for decades." Adekunle's breath caught slightly. "This position will place you above many who have more years, more connections," she added. "Some will not like it." Adekunle met her gaze steadily. "I understand," she smiled. That's why it must be you. The appointment was announced the following week. The reactions were mixed. Some applauded openly, others smiled politely while whispering behind closed doors. A few resigned quietly, unwilling to be led by someone who had once carried cement on his shoulders. Adekunle did not respond to any of it. He focused on the work. He restructured departments, established ethical review systems, introduced transparent reporting channels that protected junior staff from exploitation. He insisted that promotions be earned, not negotiated. Results matter, he told his leadership team. But how we get them matters more. Slowly, resistance softened. Those who stayed began to understand his leadership was not a threat, but a standard. One evening, as Adekunle reviewed documents at home, his phone rang. It was Daniel, the former construction worker who had once called him for help. Sir Daniel said excitedly, "I wanted you to know I've been promoted to site supervisor." Adekunle smiled. "You earned it." "There's something else," Daniel continued. "They're offering training programs now. Safety, technical skills, even management courses." Adekunle closed his eyes briefly, emotion pressing against his chest. "That's good," he said softly. "Very good." After the call, he sat quietly thinking about the man he used to be, standing under the sun, wondering if life would ever soften. It had. But not by accident. It had softened because he refused to harden. A few days later, Adekunle attended a small ceremony at one of the completed housing estates. Families gathered. Children ran freely across clean courtyards. Laughter filled the air. As he walked through the estate, a woman approached him hesitantly. "Sir," she said, "my husband works on this site. He said you changed everything." Adekunle shook his head. "He changed it by working with integrity." She smiled. "Still, thank you." As she walked away, Adekunle looked around at the home, solid, safe, dignified. This was the deal Madame Adebayo would have missed if her car hadn't broken down. This was the future that had almost never existed. Later that evening, Adekunle received one final message from an unfamiliar number. "I just wanted to say thank you. You helped me when I was scared. I never got to tell you properly." He recognized the tone immediately. "The woman from the roadside," he replied simply. "I'm glad you're safe. Please take care." He placed the phone down and stared out at the city lights. The circle had closed, not with applause, not with revenge, not with regret, but with peace. The next morning, Adekunle visited his parents again. This time not to fix anything, not to pay bills, but simply to sit. They drank tea together in the early sunlight. "You have changed," his mother said gently. "Yes," Adekunle replied, "but I hope I haven't lost myself." She smiled. "You haven't. You've just grown into who you were meant to be." As he prepared to leave, his father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, the old man said, wealth is loud, character is quiet, but only one lasts." Adekunle nodded. Driving back to the city, he reflected on everything he had endured. The missed interview, the insults, the hunger, the abandonment, the long days of labor under the sun. And the choice. That single moment when he stopped instead of walking away. Life had tested him brutally after that choice. It had taken everything before giving anything back. But now, he understood why. Because if reward had come immediately, he might have believed kindness was a transaction. Instead, he learned it was a foundation. That evening, as Adekunle stood on his balcony once more watching the city settle into night, he felt no need to ask what came next. He had already arrived at the most important place of all. A place where success no longer threatened his humanity. A place where fear no longer dictated his values. A place where doing the right thing was no longer a gamble but a habit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Adekunle was ready. By the time Adekunle reached this stage of his life, people no longer introduced him by his struggles. They spoke of his achievements, his leadership, his influence. But Adekunle knew the truth. None of it meant anything without the man he had become along the way. Months passed, and the company continued to grow under the new structure. Projects were completed on time, workers were protected, and young professionals found room to rise without fear of exploitation. Adekunle's name became associated not just with success, but with fairness. Yet the greatest changes were not happening in boardrooms. They were happening quietly in moments no one recorded. One evening after a long day, Adekunle stopped by a small roadside food stall on his way home. The woman running it looked tired, her hands moving quickly as she served customers. When she told him the price, Adekunle paid double. She tried to protest. "Please," she said, "that is too much." Adekunle smiled gently. "Keep it. Someone once helped me when I needed it most." She stared at him confused, then nodded slowly with gratitude. Adekunle walked away without waiting for thanks. That night he sat alone in his living room, lights low, thinking about how far life had carried him. His eyes drifted to the brown file still resting on the shelf, the same file he once clutched while running through traffic, the same file that had seen rejection, humiliation, and hope all at once. He picked it up and opened it. Inside were old copies of his CV certificates and handwritten notes he had once made while preparing for interviews that never came. For a moment, emotion tightened his throat. If I had gotten that interview, he whispered to himself, I might never have learned what really matters. He closed the file gently and returned it to the shelf. A week later, Adekunle attended a small private dinner hosted by Madame Adebayo. Only a few people were invited, those she trusted deeply. As they spoke about the future, she turned to Adekunle. "You know," she said, "many people think I changed your life." Adekunle shook his head. "No, madam. You only opened a door." She smiled. "Then tell me who changed it." Adekunle thought for a moment. "The man I was forced to become," he replied quietly. Madame Adebayo nodded, understanding immediately. Later that night, as Adekunle drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was short. "I never thanked you properly. I still remember your face every time I drive that road." He didn't need to ask who it was. Adekunle replied simply, "I'm glad you're well. That's enough for me." He put the phone away and continued driving. At a red light, he looked around at the city people rushing, worrying, choosing. He wondered how many lives were being shaped by small decisions in moments just like this. How many futures depended on whether someone stopped or walked away. When the light turned green, Adekunle drove on peaceful. In the weeks that followed, Adekunle began speaking more openly about his journey, not for praise, but for perspective. At mentorship sessions, he told young people the truth. "Kindness is not weakness," he said. "But it will test you. It may cost you comfort before it brings you peace." Some listened carefully. Others smiled politely, unsure. Adekunle understood. He once would have doubted it too. One afternoon, he received news that surprised even him. The company's apprenticeship program had been expanded nationwide, supported by government funding. Hundreds of young men and women from disadvantaged backgrounds would now receive training, education, and employment. When Adekunle stood before the first large group of apprentices, he felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He saw himself in their faces. "I won't promise you an easy road," he told them. "But I promise you this, your character will take you farther than shortcuts ever could." As applause filled the room, Adekunle felt something deeper than pride. Purpose. That evening, alone on his balcony, Adekunle watched the city lights come alive once more. He thought of Zainab not with pain, but with acceptance. Some people were lessons, not destinations. And that was okay. He thought of the construction site, the hunger, the sunburned skin, the exhaustion that once made him question his worth. And he thought of the road, the quiet road where everything changed. He realized then that the story of his life was not about missing an interview. It was about choosing who he would be when life gave him no guarantees. Kindness had not protected him from pain, but it had protected him from becoming someone he would later despise. Adekunle closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He had lost a job. He had lost a marriage. He had lost years. But he had gained something far greater. A life built on integrity, a heart free from bitterness, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you did the right thing even when it hurt. As the night breeze moved gently around him, Adekunle whispered a simple prayer. Let me never forget. Because he now understood the truth most people learn too late. Success without character is empty. But character tested by hardship and guided by kindness creates a life that no failure can destroy. Life does not always reward us immediately for doing the right thing. Sometimes it feels as though kindness costs too much, as if integrity only leads to loss, pain, and delay. Adekunle's journey reminds us that real character is revealed in the moments when no one is watching, when helping someone else seems to threaten our own survival. He lost an interview, a marriage, and years of comfort, not because he was weak, but because he chose compassion over fear. What makes this story powerful is not the success that came later, but the man he became before success arrived. Adekunle did not rise because he was lucky. He rose because hardship did not harden his heart. He refused to let disappointment turn him bitter, and he refused to let success erase his humility. Life tested him in poverty and later tested him again with power. In both seasons, the same principle guided him: do what is right, even when it hurts. This is the truth many people miss. Kindness is not a shortcut to wealth, but it is a foundation for peace. Integrity may slow you down at first, but it protects your soul in the long run. When the right time comes, life has a way of returning what was lost, often in ways deeper than money or status. What part of Adekunle's journey touched you the most? Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing cost you something important? Share your thoughts in the comments and let's learn from each other. If stories like this inspire you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next powerful story.